My name is Ethan. I'm 37 years old. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I've been working for almost a decade as a supervisor in a food processing factory that never stops. Literally. The factory operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a typical place, lit by fluorescent lights, with that constant smell of metal and oil mixed with the food we process. But something happened during the night shift a few years ago that still haunts me. I was working the night shift back then, a time that, let's face it, is full of strange stories. There's always someone swearing they saw a shadow where it shouldn't be or heard something that doesn't make sense. I never really paid much attention to it. Work is work, you know? But this clock thing, it's different. It's not just a rumor or superstition. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. It started subtly. It was common for employees to talk about the time stopping during the night. Feels like the hours don't pass, they would say. I thought it was just exhaustion. After all, working at night is draining. But then on a Thursday, I noticed something strange. The clocks in the factory, digital, analog, even the ones on the computers, stopped, exactly at 3:03 a.m. It wasn't a coincidence. It was like time froze for that minute. The first time it happened, I thought it was a technical glitch. I called the technician to check the system. Nothing unusual. The next day it happened again, and the day after. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I still convinced myself there was a logical explanation. Some electrical issue, maybe, or interference with the system. It couldn't be something supernatural. It just couldn't. The weirdest part, though, wasn't the clock stopping. It was what came with it. At 3:03, the whole environment changed. It was like the air got denser, heavier. The lighting seemed to dim, but the lights didn't flicker or go out. It was a feeling of being watched, but by something you couldn't see. Some co-workers reported chills. Others said they heard a faint sound, like a buzzing, but I never found anything to justify it. After a few weeks, I started noticing that no one talked about what they felt during that minute. It was as if everyone was afraid to acknowledge that it was real. I remember one night asking Greg, an experienced operator, if he also noticed something strange. He just shook his head and went back to work without saying a word. His silence bothered me more than anything. One night, I decided to monitor everything closely. I brought my own digital clock, my phone, and even a manual stopwatch. At 3:02, I started timing. When it hit 3:03, the stopwatch froze. The hands wouldn't move. My phone also froze. And during that minute, I felt the same overwhelming sensation. Something was there. It wasn't a thought. It was a certainty. I looked around, expecting to see someone or something, but everything seemed normal. Except for the absolute silence. It was like even the machines had stopped, but they kept running. It was surreal. What still scares me to this day is that after that minute, everything would go back to normal. The clocks would restart, the phones would update the time, and the environment would feel lighter, like nothing had happened. But I knew it had, and I knew I wasn't the only one who felt it. The situation began affecting the employees. People who had worked the night shift for years asked to switch to the day shift. Some started making excuses to miss work. I even started avoiding looking at the clocks near 3 a.m. It was like, by ignoring it, I could protect myself, but deep down, I knew it was just an illusion. On a day off, I decided to research the factory. I wanted to know if the land had any strange history, or if something similar had happened before. I searched local forums, old records, and even spoke to former employees. I couldn't find anything that explained it. Just vague stories about bad feelings during the night shift. Nothing concrete. After a few months, it just stopped. The clocks didn't freeze anymore. The 3:03 minute became just another minute. But to this day, I can't forget it. What happened during that time? Why did all the clocks stop at once? And more importantly, what was that presence we all felt but never dared name? I still work at the same factory, but now on the day shift. Sometimes I still hear rumors about strange things happening during the night shift, but no one mentions the clocks anymore. Maybe it's out of fear of bringing it back. Maybe it's better that way. My name is Mark. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a night security guard in a shopping mall in Springfield, Illinois. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a solitary and monotonous routine. Most of the nights go by quietly, just monitoring the security cameras and occasionally doing rounds. But what happened to me that night changed my perspective on this job forever. I can't forget what happened, and to this day the memory haunts me. It was a typical night, one of those nights I've spent in that empty shopping mall. I was in the security monitoring room, as usual, watching the camera feeds. The lighting in the security room was dim, giving it a sense of isolation, but I was used to it. The only sound, besides my headset, was the continuous hum of the air conditioning systems. Everything was calm, no problems, no suspicious movement. I was a little distracted, which wasn't good, but honestly, it was hard to stay focused on something so boring. That's when I heard it for the first time. The voice. A soft voice, almost like a whisper, coming directly from my headset. At first, I thought it was some sort of interference, maybe a glitch in the communication system. The voice was quiet, hard to understand, but I could clearly hear my name. Mark, Mark. It was shocking, but I shrugged it off, trying not to give it too much thought. But then I heard it again, this time louder. Mark, can you hear me? I stopped messing with the camera controls, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't a recording, it wasn't interference. It was a real voice. Someone was speaking to me. I pressed the communication button, trying to keep calm, and spoke to my colleague Ryan, who was at the other security station. Ryan, are you speaking through my headset? I asked, my voice still trembling a little. He replied quickly, but with a confused tone. No, Mark, I'm not. I'm not even using the radio right now. I was waiting for you to call me, but why? What happened? His answer made me even more uneasy. I was the only one using that headset at that time. The voice, which was now sounding clearer and clearer, seemed to realize my confusion. Mark, can you hear me? I'm here, near you. I looked around the security room. The only sound was my own breathing. There was no one else. Not in the hallways, not on the security cameras. Just me. The words from the voice began to consume me, and my mind tried to come up with logical explanations, but none of them made sense. With each passing minute, it became bolder, more direct. I can see you. Mark, you're alone. The voice seemed to drag on, as if it was trying to find me. The feeling of being watched, or rather hunted, grew stronger. I needed a break. I grabbed the radio and spoke to Ryan again. Can you come here? I think there's something wrong with the system. There's someone in my headset, but it's not you, right? Ryan, still at his distant station, asked if I was okay. I'm not hearing anything, Mark. Calm down, man. I'll come over, but stay calm. I breathed deeply, trying to calm myself. Ryan assured me he was coming, and I decided to step out of the security room for a moment. But before I could do anything, the voice interrupted me again. It was closer, as if it was inside my head. Mark, I can feel your fear. You will regret hearing this. My heart raced. This wasn't normal. Something was very wrong. I was starting to panic. I felt a weight on my chest, as if the air was becoming dense, hard to breathe. I knew Ryan was on his way, but the presence of that voice was driving me out of control. When Ryan entered the room, I was almost dizzy, my hands sweaty and my eyes wide. He looked at me with a worried expression. Mark, man, are you okay? What's going on? I tried to explain, but when I turned to speak, the voice came back, interrupting again. He can't help you, Mark. I'm here. Ryan looked around, visibly confused. There's no one here, Mark. It's just us. You need to calm down, man. I looked at the headset and began to realize that the voice was becoming clearer, more defined. It no longer sounded distant, but right beside me, almost whispering. Mark, can you hear me? I tried to pull off the headset, desperate to stop it, but as I did, the voice became even louder. It wasn't just in the headset anymore. It was in my mind, as if it was invading my thoughts. When I looked at Ryan, he was frozen. His eyes were fixed on a distant point, as if something was pulling his attention, but he didn't move, he just stared at me. I called him repeatedly, but he didn't react. Then an idea occurred to me. I rushed to the security cameras. If the voice was everywhere, maybe I could see it somewhere, but the screens were all blank. Nothing was working. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and started searching. Nothing about voices in headsets, nothing about frequencies causing this kind of phenomenon. I searched for hours, but the pages were blank. The searches seemed to disappear as soon as I clicked on them. Then I looked at Ryan and something was completely wrong. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed, but not on me. They seemed to be seeing something distant, something I couldn't see. The voice, now deeper and more threatening, said, "It's too late, Mark. He's no longer what he was." I didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't explain anything. I just wanted to leave, but something was holding me back. I couldn't hear my own thoughts anymore, only that voice guiding me like a puppet. The voice suddenly stopped talking. Everything fell silent. I sat there, trying to understand what had just happened, but nothing made sense. And just like it started, it stopped. There was nothing more. Ryan slowly turned to me, as if coming out of a trance. He looked at me as if nothing had happened, but I knew something was terribly wrong. I couldn't explain it. I never could. And to this day, the only thing I know is that something happened that night. And whatever it was, it never came back. But also, I was never the same. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, something tells me the voice is still there, waiting somewhere, ready to return. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 32 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I work as an IT technician. What I'm about to tell happened about 3 years ago, but to this day, every time I pass by a turned-off monitor, I feel a shiver down my spine. It was an ordinary night shift at the office where I was working. As usual, the room was silent, with the faint hum of the air conditioning breaking the absolute quiet. Most of my work was done at night, because it was quieter and had fewer interruptions since most of the employees left around 6 p.m. I was used to that almost ghostly atmosphere. Empty hallways, dimmed lights, and that silence that seemed to swallow everything. On that specific night, things started off completely normally. I was doing routine maintenance on the servers, and from time to time, I'd glance at some workstations to make sure everything was in order. The office had several rows of computers, all with turned-off monitors. I was sitting at my desk with a cold coffee next to me and an almost empty packet of chips, trying to stay awake. It was almost 2 a.m. when I first noticed something that didn't seem right. While I was checking a spreadsheet on my computer, something on the turned-off monitor in front of me caught my attention. I thought it was my own reflection, but something seemed strange. I swear I saw the reflection's eyes blink before I blinked. At first, I shook my head, thinking I was just getting paranoid from the lack of sleep. After all, it had been 2 sleepless nights because of tight deadlines. I stared at the monitor for a few seconds, and everything seemed normal. My own face was there, reflected still. I shrugged it off, laughed at myself, and went back to work. But after that, I began noticing more things. Every time I passed by a turned-off monitor, it seemed like something in the reflection didn't quite match my movements. I'd walk to the left, but the reflection seemed to hesitate for a moment before following. When I bent down to pick up a pen that fell, I had the impression the reflection stood up for a second, staring at me. That's when I started to feel uncomfortable. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just exhaustion. The pressure at work was so high, with a workload that never seemed to lessen. But when I looked more closely at the monitors, I saw something even more disturbing. Every time the reflection moved, it moved just a little slower than I did, as if it were watching me from a distance, but not quite mirroring my actions correctly. I was beginning to lose control of the situation. I decided to run a test, something to convince myself it was just exhaustion. I stood in front of a turned-off monitor and moved slowly, turning my head from side to side. The reflection seemed to follow at first, but then suddenly it smiled. I'm not joking. My reflection opened a wide smile, something I definitely didn't do. I jumped backward, knocking over my chair. My heart raced and I stood there frozen, trying to comprehend what had just happened. When I regained my senses, the room seemed darker and the temperature had dropped a little. I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me or if the air conditioning was failing. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but it was impossible to deny what was right in front of me. I looked back at the monitor, but this time the reflection wasn't smiling anymore. It was simply there, still. I stared at that image for a few seconds before the room became even quieter, and the silence pressed in, almost suffocating me. I could no longer focus on my work and left the monitor room, trying to calm myself down. I decided to take a bit of fresh air and walked down the hallway. The office was so quiet that each step seemed to echo, and I couldn't shake that strange feeling that something was watching me. When I returned to my desk, I was feeling more tense by the minute. I had trouble breathing and felt like I was being watched, but no matter how hard I looked around, I couldn't see anything unusual. It was then that the monitors became even more disturbing. They weren't just turned off anymore. Now I was seeing shadows moving behind the screens, as if something was trapped inside the screens, trying to break free. It wasn't just a reflection. They were vague, shadowy figures, moving in a way that didn't make sense. I thought about screaming, but there was no one around to hear me. Besides, I knew that if I screamed, I'd look even crazier. The feeling of claustrophobia increased every minute. I felt like I was trapped there with something that had no name, but was watching me with a malice I couldn't understand. The worst part was when I realized that all the monitors around me were reflecting figures. They weren't my reflections. They weren't the normal images I should be seeing. Each one showed something different. One displayed a shadow with distorted outlines of a person. Another seemed to reflect something moving as if it was trying to get out of the screen. That environment, which would normally feel comfortable and controlled, now felt like a prison. Panicking, I decided to run to the server room, where the air conditioning system was stronger. I needed some time to compose myself. When I got there, the environment felt even stranger. The air system was working fine, but the temperature felt colder than usual. There was something in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I looked at the monitors in the room, I saw something that made me swallow hard. My reflection was in all the monitors, and it was smiling again. No, this wasn't my reflection, I knew that now. There was something there, something that was taking advantage of the darkness, those turned-off screens to watch me. Desperate, I ran for the door, but before I could leave the room, the light flickered, and I saw it. For a second, I saw the figure. It wasn't just a reflection. It was a dark shadow, with a presence so dense it seemed to swallow all the light around it. It was watching me. I felt its presence in a way that was almost tangible, as if it were everywhere at once. That's when the lights in the office started flickering faster, and I couldn't understand what was happening anymore. I felt an overwhelming panic taking over me. I dropped everything, grabbed my things, and ran to the exit without looking back. I sprinted to the parking lot and jumped into my car, my heart still racing. I had never been so scared in my life. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent hours trying to make sense of what I had seen, but at the same time, I knew I didn't want to go back to that place. The following weeks were a nightmare. Every time I tried to tell someone what I saw, they either laughed at me or said it was exhaustion. But the worst part wasn't the night I saw those things on the monitor. The worst part is that even after all this time, sometimes when I pass by a turned-off monitor, I feel that presence again. A sensation that somehow it's still there watching me. I don't know what happened that night. I know what I saw, but I don't know what it was. And every time I see a turned-off monitor, I'm afraid that it's waiting for me. And what scares me the most is that maybe it has already found me. My name is Jack. I'm 42 years old. I live in Houston, Texas, and I work as a night porter in a residential building downtown. The night shift was never exactly easy, but I liked the silence and the calm it brought. At least, that's what I thought until that night. What happened still keeps me awake, and honestly, I'm not even sure I can explain it properly. But I'll tell you, and you can draw your own conclusions. It was a Tuesday, just after 11 p.m., when it all started. The building was emptier than usual because many people traveled during the week. I was at the desk, going over the logs from the day, when the intercom rang. I looked at the panel, and the number flashing was from apartment 708. The thing is, 708 had been vacant for years. The last tenant moved out over 5 years ago, and the landlord never managed to rent it out again. It was strange, but thinking it could be some kind of technical problem, I picked up the phone. "Reception," I said, casually. There was no answer at first, just a faint buzzing sound, like static. I was about to hang up when I heard a voice. It was low, almost a whisper, but clear enough for me to understand. It said something like, "Are you there?" My stomach tightened, but I tried to stay calm. "This is reception. Who's speaking?" I asked. More static. And then, suddenly, the voice responded, "See you later." The intercom disconnected. I stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at the panel as if it would explode. I didn't know what to think. My first reaction was that someone might have broken into the apartment, but at the same time, how could anyone be calling from the internal intercom there? I knew there was no phone or active connection in 708. Still, I decided to check. I grabbed the flashlight, the building keychain, and headed upstairs. When I reached the 7th floor, the hallway was so quiet that the sound of my boots on the floor echoed. It felt like time had stopped. I got to the door of 708 and noticed the doorknob was just as I had left it during my last round. Locked. I used the key to open it and went inside. The apartment was empty, as it had always been. There were no furniture, no lights, just dust and the smell of a closed-off place. I searched every corner, trying to find some explanation, but there was no one there. After a few minutes, I went back down to the reception. When I returned, the panel was flashing again. The same number, 708. My heart raced, but I picked up the phone once more. This time, before I could say anything, the voice spoke first. "Are you there?" It was the same phrase, the same low tone, as if it were coming from someone just inches away from the microphone. I swallowed hard and asked again who was speaking. Once again, the response was short, "See you later." And they hung up. I spent the next few minutes trying to rationalize what was happening. I thought it could be an electrical problem with the system, or maybe some kind of prank. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. I called the building supervisor, but he didn't answer. I tried the emergency number for the condo, but I didn't have any luck either. I was alone. The calls kept coming throughout the night, always with the same pattern. The voice would whisper something disconnected, usually starting with, "Are you there?" and always ending with, "See you later." The only thing that changed was the tone. As the night wore on, the voice seemed to get closer, like it wasn't coming from an intercom anymore, but from inside the building itself. At one point, I stopped answering. I didn't want to hear it anymore. But the persistent sound of the intercom wouldn't leave me alone. Even ignoring it, it was as if I could feel its presence. Something was watching me, and it wasn't just paranoia. I swear I heard footsteps in the hallway right outside the reception, but every time I looked, no one was there. When there were only 2 hours left in my shift, the calls stopped. The panel was silent, as if nothing had happened. But by then, the entire building felt heavier, as if something was hanging over it. I can't explain it, but even the air felt different. And then I heard the sound that froze me to my core. The intercom at the front desk started ringing. This time, it wasn't from 708. It was from the external panel, used by visitors to request entry. I went over there, feeling every step was a challenge, and looked at the security camera. There was no one. The button kept blinking, as if someone was standing there, but the entrance was empty. I picked up the phone, hesitating, and stayed silent, waiting. The same voice whispered, "See you later." After that, I couldn't stay there anymore. I made a quick report, left a message for the supervisor, and left as soon as the sun came up. I never went back to that building, not even to pick up my stuff. I quit the next day and found another job. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I've looked up the building, the 708, but never found anything relevant. All I know is that the voice on the intercom was real, and whatever it was, it seemed to know me in some way. And the strangest part is that sometimes I think I still hear that whisper, very softly, in quiet places, as if it's telling me it's still nearby.